Here in the last section of Chapter 2, which we are calling Chapter 2.4, we're going to talk about income distribution issues in the U.S. Since we've already talked about income distribution before, now we're going to get into more detail to recognize that in our society and all societies, income distribution is not equal for all people. Some make a lot more than others, and so we're going to get into some detail on what that looks like for the U.S. Now, how about the government? What role does the government have in increasing productivity? Well, let's go ahead and let's read through the slide a little bit, and then we'll jump off from that. So, in assessing how goods are produced and economies grow, we must take the heed of the government, the role of government that the government plays. So, we know, because we've done the statistics, we meaning economists, have done a lot of studies that market-reliant economies grow faster than government-dominated economies. Economists study this all the time, and if you look through the list of countries that are in that index that I suggest that you go look up to see where your own home country is relative on the scale of, is it more market-oriented and more laissez-faire, or is it more government-dominated? Generally speaking, and it's very, very strong correlation, market-reliant economies, market-dominated economies grow dramatically faster than government-dominated economies. And that's because entrepreneurs can freely pursue opportunities in markets. Since there is no government official telling an entrepreneur you can't do that, because they're searching for profits, entrepreneurs will innovate and create new products. This leads to faster economic growth. So when government owns the factors of production, or imposes high taxes, or tightly regulates output, or other things like also regulating labor and regulating layoff, there's strong layoff protection laws, there's strong hiring and firing laws, oftentimes it backfires on the society. They think that they're doing a protection for their people, but in fact what they're doing is they're reducing the total level of productivity of their society, and therefore when you divide the total production of your society amongst a bunch of people, then the total amount per person is relatively small. And that's why it's so dangerous to have bad government. Bad, here obviously meaning bad in the sense that it interrupts the ability of business people to increase productivity of whatever it is they're doing, even when it causes layoffs in the short run. So let's take a look at the role of government and see what kind of role it can play. So as we see here, the government plays a critical role in establishing a framework in which private businesses can operate. So the first thing is they provide a legal framework. Now, what does that mean? When we say the word legal framework, we don't mean the legal right of government to regulate people. What we mean by legal framework is property right rules and rule of law. In other words, contract law. Is it possible for business people and consumers to interact with each other relatively easily in a way that they understand and a way that everyone knows what their responsibilities are? A legal framework permits essentially a laissez-faire form of legal system. Now, that's not the only thing the government does, but in a capitalist system, that's a major part of what they do. It turns out that many countries' legal frameworks are very damaging for economic growth because they don't protect people's private property rights and the rule of law is non-existent. Government officials can meddle in individual people's affairs. They can confiscate. They can change tax rates. They can seize property. All kinds of things like that, of course, reduce dramatically the desire of business people to invest in that particular society. And therefore, providing a strong legal framework is crucial to making a highly productive society. But another thing government can do, as you see under point number 2, is they can protect the environment. We've already mentioned this earlier, negative externalities, which is just a fancy word for things like pollution, where I buy a car from Mercedes. Mercedes is happy to sell it to me. I'm happy to buy it. But unfortunately, the car puts out fumes because it's a gasoline burning car because I want the power of a gasoline car. I'm generating smoke and smog for other people. Government has a role to play here in eliminating the third-party harms. The third-party harms here, of course, would be the people who have to breathe all the fumes from all these cars. So governments can legitimately improve society by regulating things like pollution and other kinds of things that are relatively difficult for individuals to do on their own. And the last thing we'll deal with on this particular set of slides, the rest of the role of government under point number 3 is they can protect consumers, and they can do it through 2 different methods. One is fostering competition. This is antitrust law. Things like preventing monopolies, things like that. Prosecuting business people when they try to rig the market, because it turns out competition is what benefits consumers. When firms have to compete with each other, they increase the quality of their product, they lower their price, as we've seen in the car industry. Cars have gotten dramatically better over the last 30, 40 years as the competition in the auto industry in the United States has increased quite dramatically, with Japanese car companies coming to the United States, German car companies coming, the Korean car companies have come to the US. It's made a very competitive marketplace, and car companies really have to have game in order to survive in the American market. So competition is crucial for making sure customers are taken care of. And then, of course, the government has a role to play in product safety. Firms can either deliberately through negligence, or rather deliberately through trying to save money by making a product unsafe cheaply, or just accidental negligence or whatever, you can produce harmful products. And the government, of course, through the safety product regulation, can be of a great deal of value there. And then last but not least, protecting labor. Everything from workplace safety. In the United States, we have the acronym OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's a government agency that has regulations about workplace safety in order to protect workers. We have child labor laws that prevent small children from working in factories. We have compulsory schooling, that even if you grew up in a poor family where the parents don't care about schools, or unfortunately your parents are drug addicted and don't pay any attention to you, we still require that you send your kids to school, and the school will hopefully do something good for your kids so that your kids have the chance to make something of themselves later on in life. We have minimum wage laws. I'm not particularly sure that minimum wage laws are all that protecting of workers, but we'll leave that one alone since your author likes the idea. And then, of course, overtime provisions. Once you've worked a certain number of hours, then your boss is required to pay you overtime. And so that would be a way of making sure workers are not being overworked. So all of these things are positive roles that government can get involved in order to make sure we have a better society. In my opinion, the single most important one is that legal framework to make sure that you have a society with very strong protection of private property rights, the ability to buy and sell, the ability to enter a business, enter into a business line at your own will, the ability to deal with customers, the ability to either raise or lower your price, the ability to produce products of different qualities depending on what customers want, the ability to shut down a factory because of either competition has come in, or you're producing film camera equipment and people switch to digital. Can you lay off those workers in the film industry? In a capitalist society, the answer is yes. And I believe that's one of the most important advantages the United States has. That ability of firms to constantly change and react to new technology, and therefore new technology rapidly introduces itself into our society, making the average worker dramatically more productive. So that's why we have our farmers on their John Deere tractors making over $100,000 a year, whereas farmers working with a buffalo in a poor third world nation, lucky to make $2,000 a year equivalent. And the difference between them strictly comes down to the fact that in the US, it's very, very easy to introduce the new technology. So getting back to our original question, for whom is output produced? Remember, of the 3 questions, what we're going to produce, how we're going to produce it, and for whom we're going to produce, since all societies have to answer it, how has the US answered that question as to who gets the goods and services? Now, the allocation of the products that users can have can be done by either the government or by a market mechanism or a mixture of the two, which we call the mixed economy. In the United States, the majority of GDP is distributed to individuals as their income via a market mechanism. And in market distribution, the higher the income, obviously the greater the ability to buy goods and services. So having your income controls the distribution of goods and services in a market-based economy. Now, of course, doesn't have to be that way with government. With a government, you can get a distribution of goods or services whether you have income or not. Now, let's take a look at the U.S. income distribution. It is unequally distributed in the U.S., but it's also important to remember it's also unequal in every other country. As we already talked about when I was giving you all the personal example of that you all wouldn't continue working on your education or trying to get a better job if you got the exact same pay that you would have earned if you had just simply stopped with a high school degree. If we know that we need that every society, in order to get people of high ability to do more difficult work, you have to give them some extra income in order to give them the incentive. We know every society is going to have an unequal income distribution. But that doesn't mean they're all equally unequal. There are lots of differences in the inequality in the different countries. So, excuse me. One of the ways that economists measure income inequality is we divide up the society, all the people in society, into what are called quintiles, which would be dividing them up into 1/5. So picture a pizza that's been sliced in such a way that there's 5 equally sized slices. Now, the equal size is not equal incomes, it's equal numbers of people. So if you have 300 million people and you divide that up into quintiles, then each group within the society will have, 5 into 300 million is 60 million. There would be 60 million people in each particular quintile. Then what we do is we take the average of the income in that particular quintile, and then we can compare all the different quintiles to see how much people earn. So it turns out that the top quintile, or the top of 20%, because in percentage terms, 1/5 of 100 is 20. So the top 20% earns 51.9% of all the income in the United States. And then the fifth, or the poorest quintile, that would be the lowest 20%, earns 3.1% of all the income in the United States. So let's take a look here, putting into a pie chart. The richest fifth of the population. Again, this is not number. This is this measure now that we're looking at, where we're seeing this pie chart. This slice here is not the number of people in the top fifth. It's the amount of income in the top fifth. Remember, every single group that we're measuring, every quintile has the same number of people, but not the same amount of income. Because obviously the group of people that includes doctors and lawyers is going to have a way different income than the same size group of plumbers and carpenters, right? So that's my point. I want you all to recognize that the richest fifth of the population earns, of all of the income in the country, they earn 51% of it, and then the second fifth earns this slice, the third fifth, the fourth fifth, and the poorest fifth earns the smallest slice, as you would expect. That's why they're poor. They have less of the total income. Now let's look at the dollar amounts. This is 2019 data, so it's not that old. It's only a few years old, so it's pretty close to what it is now. The average to be in the highest fifth of the income distribution, in other words, to be in the top 20%, you have to make above $143,000 for a family. So we're not talking about any one person's income, we're talking about a family. So it would be perfectly possible to have, one person making $70,000 and the other person making a husband or wife making $70,000 and the other spouse earning $73,000. The two of them together would make $143,000, and that would put them just on the margin of being in the top 20%. Now, for the top 20%, if that's the lowest level you can be to be in the top 20%, the average of the people in the highest fifth make $254,000 as a family. And again, as we've already pointed out, they earn 51.9% of all the income. The second fifth, so that would be the folks between the 60th percentile and the 80th percentile, they make anywhere from $86,000 to $143,000 as a family income, with the average for that group being at $111,000 for a family. Now, of course, I'm not going to read all the numbers. You can read them yourself. Down here, the lowest fifth would have a family income somewhere between $0 and $28,000. And the average for this lowest fifth group is $15,300. Let's see, what other things to mention about that? Oh, let's take a look at, this is an interesting point, I think. If we look at the third fifth by definition is the middle fifth, isn't it? Because there's two groups of fifths above the third fifth. There's two groups of fifths below the third fifth. So the third fifth is the middle. And so you can think of this as the middle income. So middle income in the United States is anywhere from $54,000 to $86,000, with the average of that third fifth being at $68,900. So to be dead center in the United States in income, your family income has to be $68,900. Now, that's surprisingly low to many people. I don't know if it's surprisingly low to you. I know many of you all have jobs and you've been working professionally before you came back to school. Some of you have not. Some of you are relatively young and you've come straight from undergrad. You may have had a job but only been in it a few years and you haven't made that much yet. But for a professional person, a business person working in any normal corporation, $68,000 for a college educated, especially one working on their MBA, you already may be making this money on your own. But that would mean that you are individually earning as much as the average family in the United States. So while TV kind of suggests that people are awfully rich in the United States, they're not that rich, okay? Like I said, the middle income in the United States is somewhere between $54,000 and $86,000. So, as I've already pointed out, income is unequally distributed in the US and in every other country, and so that's not particularly surprising.